You do need some system to at least get a rough idea of how much energy you're burning per day in order to do that. Because like
Mhm.
if you're gonna be in a deficit, that's that means eating fewer calories than you're burning. So you need to have a rough idea of how many calories you're burning.
Wits and Weights community, welcome to another episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. Today I'm sitting down with Greg Nuckols to talk about lifting, MacroFactor, and science. You'll learn what he's been up to lately, his take on lifting and life, and all things MacroFactor. We'll explore how to be consistent, maybe how to enjoy tracking your food, how to incorporate research into your health and fitness routine, and other words of wisdom he might have for us. Greg Nuckols lifts weights, writes about lifting weights, and coaches people who want to get better at lifting weights. He has an MA in exercise and sports science and has held 3 all time world records in powerlifting. He also co hosts the Stronger by Science podcast, which you should absolutely have in your feed if you enjoy digging into the latest research on lifting, nutrition, and many other topics delivered with a unique blend of humor and I'll say world building. Greg is, of course, the co founder and head of content at Stronger by Science and the co founder of MacroFactor, the food logging app that I use personally and can't stop talking about. And finally, Greg has been a pivotal inspiration in my personal journey of health and this very podcast. So, Greg, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, first question really is how do you do it all, right? Because you have a lot going on. You're very engaged online. You've spoken about the need to balance things, and I think that ties nicely with stress management, mindfulness. I know it's Mental Health Awareness Month and all those things. Shed some light on how you balance everything right now.
Oh yeah, that maybe wasn't the best framing device for this question, the whole mindfulness and mental health awareness month type of deal. No, I mean, I work a lot. I mean, there's,
Look, man, I ask these questions because it's selfish for me too. I'm like, how do you do it? Because I need to figure it out. It's all good.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, I work a lot, just a lot of hours, and, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, so two things just to kind of I wasn't gonna say not necessarily like disabuse you of the notion that I get a lot done, but just like some considerations that make it a little bit easier. Um, One is that like I I pay people to do things that I used to do that are
Mhm.
relatively time consuming, but aren't necessarily as like public facing. So, like I externally got less done when I still responded to like all of the support emails for the various businesses I run, but now we have people handling the support emails for us. Yeah, like just little things like that, like
Yeah.
take some of the administrative tasks off my plate. Um, Speaking of which, the person who does support emails for Stronger by Science and MacroFactor is Adam Fisher, and Adam is incredible. Like can't speak highly enough
He is.
of
Great guy.
Adam.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm married but no kids, and so that's a large obligation that a lot of people have that I don't, which allows me to work more and get more done.
I get
Um,
it, man.
but
I
yeah, I
get it.
mean, so there's some like kind of like structural and lifestyle factors in play. Um, and yeah, beyond that, I get a lot done because I work a lot.
I get it, man. No, I ask like I know there's a lot of like entrepreneurs that probably listen to this show, guys who want to lift but are super busy. And I get it. Like you've always been really responsive, even to me. Early on, I remember asking you questions, whether it was MacroFactor or lifting thing or whatever. I'm like, wow, Greg actually got back to me personally, and which was kind of cool. So and you had that phase of your business and now you're in a different phase. It just came to mind, just seeing everything you do. So what about your lifting right now? What does that routine look like? And are you going after specific goals for that?
Yeah, not as much lifting these days, honestly. Still hitting upper body pretty hard. Um, I had been having hip and back issues for a while. The back issues that was like an old freak injury happened when I was like 16. Like I know how to manage that, work around it. Like that was fine. But then maybe like 3 years ago, started having hip issues as well. Um, and I think I can trace it back to when I started playing more basketball again.
Okay.
Um, so I so I b before I got really into powerlifting, basketball was my primary sport, and I was quite good at it, but the last time I had played pretty seriously, I was, like, 160 pounds,
Mhm.
and, trying to play the same game at, like, 250 as I did at
Mhm.
160, um, little bit tougher on my body, because I played, like, a pretty, like, violent, like, slashing, like, offensive game, like, a lot of change of directions, fast acceleration, deceleration, um, which, like, the forces you're putting on your body scale with the body mass you have and just the amount of force you're capable of developing, so I was a lot heavier and a lot stronger, and, I don't think my right hip labrum was ready to deal with that. So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Man, I
I
can
don't
relate. I can relate. Right hip, exact same thing.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. It's put my lower body training not on pause, but, like, kind of on the back burner. I mean, I don't want to exacerbate it and make it worse. So I'm probably gonna have to get just, like, a little laparoscopic surgery this winter.
Okay.
Um,
So it's a torn labrum where they might have to like do the
yeah,
scraping or whatever it is. Yeah.
yeah, they did
Yeah.
like a MRI arthrogram, type of thing, and they said it looked like a torn labrum, maybe a little cyst on the head of my femur, maybe some FAI in the mix as well. So yeah, like that hip overall is just like kind of janky. So I'll probably get into lower body training a bit more seriously again after that
Yeah.
all gets cleaned up. But yeah, I mean upper body is still hitting it hard, but like
Cool.
pretty boring stuff, I guess. Like just sort of like bodybuilding type of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get it having to work around these things. I'm convinced that my hip issue came from hip thrusts because they were so new to me. Like this is like a
Mm,
couple of
yeah.
years ago after getting back from my own back surgery and getting back into lifting and just hitting everything really hard again, which is always the best thing to do. But yeah, so basketball, do you have a dog in the race for the finals or for the what's going on now?
Man, I really hope the Heat knock off the Celtics.
Okay, all right.
I would love either, Jokic or Jimmy to get a title.
Yeah.
Of the 2, I don't know. So if I was, like, scripting the NBA, which currently no one is, like, the writer strike is happening, so I guess they're just, like,
Mhm.
actually playing the games these days. That's a joke, that's a joke. TV writers don't script the NBA. It is,
Of
of
course.
course, the refs, as we learned from,
It's the
Tim
refs.
Donaghy, uh, kind of joking about that as well. Although watching some of the playoff games, it makes me skeptical, you
Mhm.
know? Um, yeah.
I'm with you, man.
So
Especially when it
some of
doesn't go your way. You're just like
some of those, Scott Foster, Chris Paul games are pretty wacky. I think that's probably just, like, personal malice instead of necessarily trying to, like, swing the betting lines, but, who knows, who knows?
So,
Um,
you
in
like the
any
Heat or you want the Celtics to get knocked off?
I want the Celtics to get
Yeah,
knocked off.
okay.
So, that was, a very long preamble of saying if everything went right, I don't I don't have that much faith in the Heat's roster. Like, I
On
think
paper, yeah.
I think they're a I think they're a good team, but I think that they, just, like, perennially overperform, and I think Eric Spoelstra is a really, really great playoff coach, but I'm just skeptical that they have the talent to keep going back to the finals year over year, but
Yeah,
I think the Nuggets have that. So, I kind of want the Heat to get through. So, like, in my perfect scenario, the Heat get by the Celtics, win the finals, and then I think Denver is building a juggernaut, so I think if the Heat won this year, the Nuggets have a
okay,
championship
okay.
window where they'll be contending for the next 3 or 4 years. So I want both of those teams to win a title, and for that to happen, I think the Heat winning this year would probably give it the highest probability of both teams eventually winning one. But uh, in my non perfect scenario, I would want Denver to win this year. Just
Mhm,
I just love Jokic, man. He's a
mhm.
pleasure to watch.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like before we started recording, you said, if someone had a dog, you'd like them more. Well, I grew up in South Florida, so I've always been a Heat fan. So that's the right answer, Greg. um,
Dude, they've
yeah,
they've got something special going down there. Eric Spoelstra
yeah,
might be the most underrated, just like single person in the NBA. Like
yeah, he's-
they're
yeah.
the whole thing about the Heat having like four undrafted players playing heavy minutes. Like I think that storyline's a little bit overblown in the media, but I mean, they do, man, just looking at the talent that they have on their roster compared to certainly the Celtics who they're playing now, and went up 3-0 on, but also just the teams that have been eliminated
Yeah,
to this point. Like I think that the undrafted players they got were definitely like diamonds in the rough that had
for
been
sure,
underrated,
for sure.
like and
Yeah.
that being the reason they went undrafted. Like, they're good players, but um, yeah, I just think the Heat have, in a general sense, just less talent on their roster
Mhm.
than
Yeah, I would agree.
most of the teams they've been playing against,
Yeah.
but they just win. Like Spoelstra gets so much talent out of them. And I mean, this isn't even the most like obscenely bad roster he's been working with and getting production out of. Like I remember after LeBron went back to Cleveland and Wade retired, like those are two incredibly valuable players that they got nothing back from. Like LeBron just
Yep.
walked in free agency and Wade retired and Bosch was, like, starting to get some age on him, like,
Mhm,
he lost a
mhm.
step as well. So, like, if you have 2 star players, like, you have 2, like, supermax contract slots, and those players leave and you get nothing in return, that is the kiss of death for just about every franchise. Um, you're looking at a decade of purgatory before you
Yeah,
come back.
for sure.
And the Heat had, what, like, 1 down year, and then were I think man, my memory's hazy, but I think like the second year after LeBron left, they either had like a 51 win season or were on a 50-win pace, before then Bosch had to retire because he was getting like blood clots in his
Yeah.
legs just
Mhm.
randomly. But yeah, I mean that was a roster of scrubs that he either led to the playoffs or got very close to the playoffs. And then yeah, your third star player also just has to retire prematurely. You get nothing in return for that, and give it like another 2 years, and they're good again. Like
Yeah, I know.
that's wizardry. And I think like the GM and front office are very smart, but I think a lot of that is just Eric Spoelstra being an unbelievably good coach and just being able to get wins out of any roster he's working with.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what happens, man. We'll see. I don't know when this show comes out. It'll probably still be in the finals a few weeks from now. So we'll see how it goes, Greg.
Yeah. Also,
We'll see.
I'm very sensitive to the fact that this isn't a basketball
No,
podcast.
no, it's cool. It's all good.
It's
It's all good.
the
Tangents.
finals are coming
It's
up.
fun.
I've been
They're
watching a
coming up.
lot of
You know,
basketball. I'm
there we
very
go.
much in that headspace.
Yeah. Well, okay. So since we're talking about high performers out there, one of the segments I've been missing for a while on your show is the feats of strength, and I was just curious if you knew any lately that people should be aware of.
Um, Man, I don't have the numbers right on the tip of my tongue, but I think the nuttiest performance that I've seen in probably at least the last year, maybe last 2 years, was, Jesus Oliveiras's total that he put together at the Sheffield. Um, I mean, he beat the total record pretty handily. Looked like he had more in the tank on certainly his deadlift. Um, and I mean, he's still young, and super heavies generally peak like late 20s, early 30s. He's what, like 24? Um,
Crazy.
so that performance itself was freak. Sorry, I cut you off.
We're talking about his total. No, 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 his total 11:52.5. That was in March, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And it was a big jump. Yeah, from like 4% more. Yeah,
yeah.
awesome.
So that was in and of itself a nutty performance, and is just I think just like an in like an appetizer to what is to come from him. Like I
Ah, that's
just
crazy.
putting together a total like that at his age is bonkers.
Yeah.
And I expect, like, I wouldn't be surprised if he pushed the record another, I mean, at least 50 kilos. I mean, maybe 100 kilos over the next, like, 8 years or so. Like, it's like, the numbers themselves are crazy, but then,
What yeah, what ex I mean, so what do you think explain is it genetics? Is it what explains this? When you have these step changes, I mean, just in general in the history of mankind going with these huge leaps.
yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly genetics. So one of the trends you see, one of the trends you're seeing in powerlifting now, and historically you see in various sports, is that I think that there's just kind of like an innate human desire to chalk things up to kind of uh, like accessible progress. And by that I mean the idea that, like, you see records going up and you're like, "Oh, that's because training practices have meaningfully improved, nutrition is meaningfully improved, recovery
Technology.
practices have
Yeah.
meaningfully improved, whatever."
Yeah.
And so, like, we can go figure out what that is, and then, yeah, even if I'm not as gifted as the people who are winning world championships, I can, like, benefit from those improvements, and that's going to make me better, that's going to make the whole sport better. And, like, I think there might be, like, the tiniest little bit of truth to that, but I don't think that's most of it. um in general, what happens is just records go up because talent pools get broader and deeper. So if you compare powerlifting, like performance in the sport of powerlifting, for, like, the median lifter, or even like the 80th, 90th percentile lifter or whatever, um, it, like, really hasn't changed, uh, like, at all. So if you look at what, like, typical performances looked like in, like, 2012, 2013, compare them to what typical performances look like today, it's the same. But records have gone way, way up. And I think that's mostly just because the athlete pool has gotten way, way bigger. And when you're talking about records and champions, you're a s that's a game of outlier hunting, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like the
And
tail of the normal curve. You're just
yeah,
pushing it out a little bit by having this wider pool. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
if you have like 100 people in the sport, you'll find people who are 2 standard deviations from the mean. You might even get lucky and find someone 3 standard deviations from the mean. Then you get 10,000 people in a sport, and now, like, there's a pretty decent chance you'll have at least 1 or 2 people who are, like, 4 standard
Mm.
deviations from the mean, and as the population gets bigger and bigger, you just are able to find freakier and freakier freaks,
Right.
because that's who holds records.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, the sport of powerlifting has exploded since, like, 2014 or so. And so I think we're seeing now, yeah, just people who are bigger genetic outliers than the people who are winning a decade ago. Um, so I
Yeah,
think
no. Yeah.
I think that's part of it, and I think part of it as well is with the growth of the sport. You also see people getting into it younger. Um, so, like, when I first started competing in 2012, was it 2012 or 2013? Doesn't matter, one of those. Um, like, there weren't many youth competitors in powerlifting, like youth, teenage. It was basically a sport that people would get into when, I mean, like, a lot of them were like ex-athletes or whatever. So, like, I played football in high school,
Mm.
didn't make a college squad, or like, yeah, I played like D3 college football. And now I like lifting weights. I want an excuse to keep lifting weights. I'm pretty strong. Hey, there's this sport, powerlifting. I'll give it a shot. Like, that used to be
Sure.
the standard way people got into the sport. Um, now, like, you are seeing more youth and teenage lifters just competing, like, getting into the sport, um, either directly or their school just has, like, a really good strength and conditioning program for basketball, football, whatever. The coaches, like, maybe tell the kids about powerlifting, and they do some, like, powerlifting style training in the off
Mhm.
season, much more so than they would have done, a decade ago. Um and so, yeah, I mean, like, there are I think it takes time to get really good in
Right.
any sport. And there's also just kind of like natural physiological ages when people should be the best at stuff. And I think if you went back 15, 20 years, like most powerlifters just got into the sport too late to
Okay.
ever hit their true peak. Like, like most of the people who were the best in the sport were like in their mid 30s, which mid 30s isn't old by any means, but like it's old for sports.
Yeah.
And I think weightlifting, like Olympic weightlifting, is a really good point of comparison because it's another sport where competitive success is largely determined by just like how strong you are. Um, but it's also an older sport and it's much bigger and much more competitive globally.
Okay.
So there's I think it's a good representation of where like a robust, very mature strength sport kind of ends up
Mhm.
and the sort of trends you should expect to see. And yeah, like weightlifters generally peak between like 24 and like 29. And like, there might still be a couple people who are adding a couple kilos to their total as they get into their 30s, but usually they add some kilos to their total but also bump up a weight class and maybe wind up a little bit less competitive than they were before. But yeah, like that's the trend you generally tend to see. So I think that for like the best of the best in powerlifting. Like a decade ago, they just got into the sport a decade too late
Right.
and wound up really, really strong in their early to mid 30s, but not as strong as they would have ended up if they would have started training a decade prior and been able to kind of like hit their prime in like their late 20s or so.
Yeah.
So I think that's a consideration. But yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly just the talent pool thing, and like I mentioned before, you see that in like every sport. Um, like whenever the total pool of competitors increases, or whenever a sport can find a new particularly well suited pool of competitors, it tends to do a lot better.
Yeah. No,
I,
I'm glad I asked that because this is like when you talk about science and correlations and all that, just the idea that it's going to favor the best of the best, and so you widen it. That best kind of keeps pushing,
yeah.
and even if people think there are other reasons behind it, because I know in the running world when they were breaking all those records for decades, it was ascribed to things like shoes and technology and training. But at the end of the day, there's probably a lot of what you're saying behind that as well.
Well,
Yeah.
and depending on the distance and the
Yeah.
area you're talking about, a
Yeah.
lot of drugs as well. Like,
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
there's a reason why there are a lot of, like,
Fair
middle
enough.
distance records that are still on the books that have been there a long time, or
There we
ones that
go.
are just now, like, barely getting broken that were set in, like, the early '90s, but yeah.
Yeah, I got it. A lot of us wish we started lifting in our 20s, and, like, for me, it wasn't until I did CrossFit for about 10 years, and that, just tiny bit moved the needle from sedentary, and then finally got into it about 2020, so, all right, you wanna talk about MacroFactor? Can we do that?
Sure, yeah, let's do
All
it.
right. So just for those listening who haven't heard me mention about 500 times on the show so far, because this is the episode 70 something here. Um, it's something I use. My clients use it. I'm an affiliate, just full disclosure, because I'm a fanboy anyway. So why not? And Greg gave me the opportunity. So I'm a little bit biased, but I use it personally, and I've tried tracking food over the years, probably for a decade or more, many times, and many of us have done that. And every time I hated it. It was tedious. It didn't work. The app sucked. And it wasn't until MacroFactor came out. I think I heard you guys talking about it on the podcast. I'm like, I've got to try that out. I did it, and pretty quickly, within days, probably, I was like, "This is different." It's helping me not hate tracking. It's fast, it's easy. I don't have to think about it even. And I got into a very consistent routine that did change my life. I've talked about this on the podcast that just getting control over the food, because I'd already started to learn to lift properly and I knew how to gain weight, but I didn't know how to control, the ups and downs. And then logically led to being able to get healthier, and then logically to this moment talking to Greg Nuckols on my podcast. So my first question for you is, how often do you hear stories like that, and how do they make you feel being behind the team of MacroFactor?
Yeah, we hear stories like that all the time, and they make me feel very good. um, yeah, so to your point, so I think that with food logging and nutrition tracking, um, I think that there are a lot of things that people know they should do, or maybe even just want to do. But the likelihood of them doing it and sticking with it scales non-linearly with the amount of friction that they experience doing it. Um, and so like that may sound like mumbo jumbo, but just to make it
Well,
practical.
we're all nerds here. So are my
Um,
listeners. It's
yeah.
a self-selected community.
So yeah, so like let's say someone wants to start lifting weights. Um, and let's say there's only one gym in their town, and they currently live in a place where the gym's like a 15-minute drive or like a 15-minute walk or whatever. Like they can get to the gym easily in a relatively short amount of time, not very much friction. They start going to the gym, it's great. But then they, let's say they move, like their lease runs out, they just buy a new house, whatever. There's still just one gym in their town, but now it's like a 40-minute drive because they move to the other side of town. Um, their willingness to keep going to the gym because the amount of friction to actually get there has increased pretty substantially. Um, their attendance for workouts might go from like 90% to like 50%, and then they're like, well, I'm already being inconsistent. Me, the types of reasons that you can use to justify not going to the gym
Sure.
gets a little longer. Like you start with a consistent habit, and you're like, it's a longer drive, but I'll keep making it. And maybe that goes well for like a week or two, but then you're like, man, like I've got some other thing going on tonight. Like I'll just miss this one workout. And then, a month down the line, it's like, I'm just tired after work. I don't feel like driving
Mhm.
40 minutes. Like, fuck it. I'm not doing it. Um,
It's like the balance of willpower and resistance has just shifted toward resistance.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
So, and if that drive went from like 15 minutes to 20 minutes, slight increase in friction, but like maybe not enough that it's really going to affect things. But then at some point, it's like you almost like flip a switch where the amount of friction required to do what you want to do goes from being a reasonable amount that you can definitely stomach and are totally fine with to as soon as it like crosses that barrier, now it's like
Mhm.
it's too much. Like I'm not going to do it, or at least not as consistently. And so when we were building MacroFactor, we had that general concept in mind when thinking about the food logger, because I do think that that is the sort of dynamic in play when it comes to consistently tracking your food for a lot of people. Um, like, yeah, a thing that people, like, pretty consistently report is, like, "I don't like food logging, it's
Mhm.
annoying, like, it takes time." Like, it adds a little bit of friction to every meal you eat because you gotta pull out your phone and take a little bit to track it. Um, but we were very mindful about making MacroFactor's food logger as efficient as possible and taking as few steps and as little time as possible to do like any logging related behavior just to reduce that friction a little bit. And so like it may sound like a small thing, but um, if you can pull out your phone and log your meal in 30 seconds, it's like, okay, like that's pretty chill. It is still a little friction. It would still be slightly easier to just not log your food, but if it's like 30 seconds, whatever. But then if it's like 2 minutes, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal. Much like a 15-minute versus 40-minute drive doesn't sound like that big of a deal But then when it's like, man, I'm putting something in my mouth 4 or 5 times per day,
Mhm.
it takes time every time, especially if you're on, like, a free version of a freemium app and you've gotta, like, X out of 2 ads every time you try to, like, add a snack.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and it's not like any of the food loggers out there are so inefficient that it takes, like, 10 minutes to log a
Sure.
meal. But, like, there is, I think, for a lot of people, a palpable difference between, like, 30 seconds and a minute.
It's a
And
huge
so
difference. I just tell you personally, it is a huge difference. Everybody I've worked with been like, "Whoa." It's like
yeah,
fast, you know? Yeah.
it sounds like it should be a very trivial thing, but I think that it's very important. Like, if you can shave off just, like, 2 or 3 steps in, like, 10 seconds from the time it takes to log food, I think that that helps a lot of people get from uh, the side of the barrier where it's so much friction that it's just going to be onerous and they're not going to stick with it, to kind of the other side of that friction barrier where, hey, like, now it's chill and this is something I already want to do. And so, like, this little bit of friction I'm experiencing is something I'm totally willing to take on board, because of the benefits I get from this.
Yeah, it's to the point where the community is so trained in this idea that when a new feature comes out that is like an extra tap, you'll know about it pretty quickly. 'Cause they'll say, "Wait a minute, the friction here is just is not that perfectly optimal, almost zero like we're used to." Now, because you wrote about the vision for the app that
Mhm,
you want people to to achieve their nutrition goals without hassle, without stress, which
mhm.
is kind of tied into this. So continuing with this theme, how far along are you in that vision? I mean, is there still some more big things that you're trying to solve to get there without revealing secrets, of course?
Yeah, I mean, there's I don't know. Like, this is also something that's nonlinear, I guess. So the amount of things that we want to do, just
Mhm.
the length of our roadmap, I don't know. Like, we're gonna keep adding to it. Like, currently though, if we just said, hey, nope, everything, just take our current roadmap. We're never going to take another new feature request. We're just going to do the things we have planned now. I mean, it's probably 5 years of
It's a lot.
stuff we wanna keep doing. Um, but I think, like, we prioritized our roadmap in, I think, a not stupid way, and,
Mhm,
so you focus first on the things that have the largest impact.
mhm,
Um, so in terms of how much the rest of the roadmap will affect, like, user experience and giving people, like, the core features they want and delivering on them well, you know, I think we're maybe like a fifth of the way through all of the things we want to do with the app, but probably 80% of the way through kind of like marginal utility,
mhm.
that will be delivered by, like, increasing features and whatnot. So, yeah, kind of like a Pareto thing, you know.
Yeah, although you never know, right? Because I could tell you as a coach, like a desktop or a coaching version,
Oh
that
yeah,
can
yeah.
open up huge, a huge market actually, to be
Oh yeah,
honest.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm thinking
yeah,
about just kind of like
yeah,
the typical user.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
But yeah,
yeah, right,
so
right.
like we do want to, like, add utility for, like, coaches to manage their nutrition clients
Sure,
directly through
sure.
MacroFactor. Which, like, yeah, that will be, like, a huge thing for coaches. But that's kind of like what I was talking about, where, like, when we add that, it will be huge for a minority of our
It's true.
users,
Yeah, fair
and
enough.
most of our users won't even know that
Right,
it's
right, right,
a
right.
new thing that exists. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, regarding the objections people often have to tracking, I wanted to touch on a few more because we mentioned the time for it. In MacroFactor, there's also the way it flags your data, or I should say, the lack of any punishment or shaming or whatever you want to call it that some apps have with red colors and things like that. There's that feature, and then there's also another one that comes up a lot is how often you have to weigh yourself,
Mhm,
and with even if the app didn't exist, I think it's a good idea to do that. And now I have more clarity behind that as to how the app does it with the moving trend. But
mhm.
talk about some of those other aspects.
Yeah, so, starting with our kind of like shame-free UI approach. So with a lot of apps, if you say, "Hey, I have a goal of eating 2,000 calories a day or whatever." If you go to like if you eat something and it puts you at like 2,010 calories, um, some apps will just like give a pop-up where it's just like, "Hey, warning, you're about to go over your calorie goal." And like most of them, it's kind of like the maybe the font will change, certainly the color will change, it'll like turn red, kind of like a bright indicator of like, "Hey, you've done something wrong, like you've fucked up in some way." And we don't do that in MacroFactor, and that's like partially a philosophical thing, but it's also like partially like an evidence-based thing as well.
Mm.
It's like the philosophical thing is like I don't I don't I don't think it's good to like be dicks to people, I guess.
Mhm, mhm.
Like
Yeah,
like
there's a
things that
human element to it behind this. I agree. Yeah.
yeah, like if something makes you feel bad and it doesn't need to make you feel bad for it to help you accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish. I think just your default posture should be, hey, let's not make people feel bad unnecessarily. Um, but then also from like the evidence based side of it, like shaming based approaches to like weight loss in particular, but just like behavior change in general, just have a piss poor track record. Like they don't work.
Mm,
Because like one of the big barriers people face with with a lot of this stuff, and like I'm going to be speaking in like a weight loss context, but really just like any sort of like lifestyle behavior change type of deal. One of the big hurdles you need to overcome is lack of self efficacy. Because like most of this stuff is like it's not easy, but it's simple, you know? And if there's like a simple thing people can do to accomplish some sort of change that they want to see in their life, um, if they have pretty high self-efficacy, like if they believe they can do it and believe they can pull it off, and the steps laid out in front of them aren't like if you don't like unnecessarily complicate something that should be simple, that does set someone up on a pretty good path towards success, but, like, you do have to clear that self-efficacy
mm,
barrier, and so, like, shame-based approaches to, like I said, weight loss in particular, but, like, behavior change in general, uh, tend to show that, like, approaches that take, like, a shame-based, orientation, uh, like, ultimately do more harm than good. Because ultimately, what you're doing is you're validating someone's pre-existing low
mm.
self-efficacy,
Yeah.
right? Like if they are trying something that's new to them, that they already perceive will be a challenge, or maybe they're attempting something that they've tried and failed at before, they're going into that with low self-efficacy, and so if you just have like UI elements that like flag and just like scream at someone like, "Hey, you
That you
fucked up.
failed.
Hey, you fucked up." Uh,
Yeah.
they have low self-efficacy and you're just validating for them, "Yeah, like you suck at this. You're bad at this."
Yeah.
And that's a recipe for failure. And like I said, I don't just say that on a purely philosophical level. There's research on this. Like it just doesn't work. Um, and so, like, even independent of the app space, like that is something that bugs me, just kind of like society wide, like in the media, in the way people talk to each other. Like, there is, I think, a lot of kind of like shaming directed at people who are like trying to lose weight, change their body composition. Um, like, I mean, I don't know, not to like get too I don't know, like political or whatever, but like fat phobia is a very real thing, and I think if
Mhm.
someone hasn't been fat, they haven't experienced it, and so if they're like, "No, like it's not real or it doesn't matter." It's like, "No, you're full of shit." Um, and so yeah, I think that there's um, I don't know. I think a lot of people in the fitness industry think that like, ooh, no, like the way we need to go about this is like with a tough love approach. Like say, hey, like you're fat, that's bad. It's because you're lazy and make bad choices, and it's gonna kill you, and so, like, you need to lose weight. Like, it's just purely negative framing. And, yeah, like, shaming people for being in the position they're in and the choices they make and saying, like, "Ah, it's because you have, like, low willpower, you're a piece of shit," whatever, like, even if even if the "you're a piece of shit" thing isn't stated, like, it's felt.
Implied, yeah, for
Like,
sure. Yeah.
that's the subtext. Um, and yeah, it's like, I don't know, that's what people have been that's the approach people have been taking to try to get people to lose weight since, like, the '70s, and obesity rates keep going up. And so there's a bit of, like, definition of insanity is doing the same thing
Mhm.
and expecting a different result. Like, we've tried shame-based approaches to to get people to lose weight and change their lifestyle for fucking decades now,
Yeah.
and it's not working, but people still seem to think that it's going to work, which, yeah,
Yeah, you
that
get no argument from me.
that's
No,
not
for
the
sure.
case.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely take that positive approach. And I wonder with some of these other apps, if I'm sure it's not always intentional. I think there's like a gamification aspect to it. They're trying to induce with the, just like the dopamine response on
mhm,
apps that get you addicted to a game or something. It's almost like the opposite of, you know, like you said, shaming, but not necessarily trying to do that,
yeah.
right? And you've discovered that that's what happens. And I think a lot of people that use MacroFactor will say this is refreshing because it's the first thing that doesn't seem to have done that.
Well, I think that there's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario where I think that I think that a lot of people download a nutrition app because they feel like they need to keep their nutrition in check. They feel like I do have a tendency to overeat, and I want a tool that will either keep me from doing that or like help me keep myself from doing that. Um, and if someone has already like been kind of in the weight loss space and has attempted diets before, I think there's like a little bit of Stockholm syndrome. Like
Mm,
since every since everything you've like consumed up to this point is framed in a negative way of like, hey, like you suck, but like here's this thing you can do that will like make you better.
mm.
Like I think they've like already internalized that, and so they just like expect that from the tools that they use. So in a general sense, it's probably not good. It's probably not actually going to help them accomplish the goals they have, but it is behaving in the way that they expect it to behave because
Sure.
like they do like anticipate and expect to be treated like that, and they think that that's how like that feedback should be delivered because it has generally been delivered in kind of like a negative framing up to that point. And so I think that I think that it's like, I certainly don't think it's malicious, absolutely not, but I
Mm.
don't necessarily think it's gamification. I think it's like meeting users' expectations, but I
Yeah.
think those expectations have been set by negative experiences, and maybe like breaking user expectations would be the better way to go about it,
Mm.
where
Okay.
it's like, "Hey, you think that you want this app to shame you, but, like, what if it didn't? I think if you give the app not shaming you a shot, you'll actually find that you prefer that and it's actually helpful."
Yeah, and it's a selling point of it, but sometimes hard to get across until you use it, right?
Yeah,
Because you're like, well, "What do you mean?" "Oh, now I see what you mean."
yeah, yeah,
When
yeah.
it's telling you is here's how much you're over or under, but that's it. It just gives you data, and there's nothing else to kind of beat you over the head
Yeah.
of your failures. Yeah.
So that's one element of it. Another element of it is I think that, that just being kind of like the default UI design, fails to consider a lot of just kind of like practical considerations, I guess. So um, it kind of sets a binary where it's like, hey, if you're under your calorie target or under this particular nutrient target, that's good. But
Mm,
if you go over, whether it's by like 1 calorie or 500, it's bad. Like it kind of like draws that line in the sand. And just from like a purely like practical perspective, that also just doesn't tend to make much sense.
true.
So, if like let's say someone's trying to lose weight and they're trying to lose a pound a week. That's a rate of weight loss that's probably going to be, pretty tolerable, pretty reasonable for most folks. They're not going to be just too ravenously hungry, but they're not going to be making progress so slow they get frustrated. Like whatever. Like that's just what we'll kind of use as a point of reference.
Mhm.
So if there's a warning indicator, and let's say that comes out to this person like a calorie target of 2,000 calories a day, just to make the example easier. So if that's the scenario, and like, hey, 2,000 calories a day, that's going to help you lose a pound a week. Um, but you're kind of putting a binary warning at 2,000. So if that's someone's goal and they only eat like 1,000 calories, that's like a 1,500 calorie deficit. Um, and like, yeah, they're gonna lose weight pretty quickly, but they're also gonna feel like shit all the time and probably burn out pretty quickly. So like, if you're gonna be having a warning, why don't you just keep the number red until they eat enough calories that they're somewhat close to their calorie goal for the day? Like, I think 1,000 calories would be worse for their goal than 2,001 calories,
Right, you're saying a range around the target or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, like, yeah, if 2,000 calories is the perfect calorie goal for you and you eat 2,050, that's great. Like, that's a great day.
It's
Now
really close.
instead of a 500-calorie
Yeah,
deficit, it's a 450-calorie deficit, and you know how much the rate you'll lose weight at with a 450-calorie deficit? Pretty fucking close to a pound a
yeah.
week, like, it's, um, like, that's still good, you know? Um,
Yeah, not to
and
mention the
so
tolerance for even the accuracy of the numbers, which is a
yeah,
separate topic, yeah.
and so functionally, it's saying any number, like, under your calorie target is equally good. Like, that it's not
Mhm.
it's not explicitly saying that, but that is kind of like the
Right.
implication of that UI element. And any number above your target is equally bad. Um, and so, yeah, like, that doesn't make much sense for a lot of the goals people have. Like, I do think that it's better to think of targets as a general range where it's like,
Mhm.
hey, if I'm 200 calories under, that's great. If I'm 200 calories over, that's also great. Like, you're close. And as long as you're close, like, it's gonna be good enough for most goals to at least move you in the direction you're trying to move. Um
Yeah, and
and-
on that point, and I'm sure you've seen a lot more data than I have, but I see individuals have their own level of, variability in that
Mhm.
range, right? Some people are very spot on, and some people vary by
Yeah,
several hundred calories every day, but then they still hit the weekly number.
yeah,
It's just an individual thing. Yeah.
yeah. But then like I said, so something else that we like very very frequently hear from users is that those like red numbers and negative UI elements, um, much like they frame all, like they tacitly communicate that all numbers below your goal are equally good. They tacitly communicate all numbers above your goal are equally bad. So something we very very frequently hear is it's like, oh yeah, like, the number turned red when I cleared 2,000 calories. So it's like, hey, this day is already a failure. Um, so yeah, like fuck it, I'm just gonna order a whole large pizza and down a six pack. You
Mhm.
know, whereas like if it went red because they went from 2,000 to 2,050, like that's good. And like
Yeah.
2,050 is a hell of a lot better than 6,000 if your goal is 2,000 calories a day to lose weight. But yeah, like I think that just sort of like binary below is good, over is bad framing puts again, like, not everyone and probably not even most people, but puts like a a pretty significant minority of people in the mind space of like, hey, if I went over the days already a failure, so like fuck it. Like I'm just
Yeah,
gonna go
yeah,
completely off the rails, which I mean that's bad for your progress, you know?
right.
Like
No,
that's
for sure, man. Oh,
yeah,
you know
like
what else tied
how
into that? Yeah, and tied
so
into that also is the idea that you, um, when you do that, you sometimes cheat the numbers that you're entering. I've seen
yeah,
that
yeah,
too. You know, you're like, "Well, I'm only gonna be 50 over, so I'll just not log the 50
yeah.
and I'll stand to the number." Yeah,
Yeah, like so it also like incentivizes you to keep a bad data record
right.
for yourself,
Cheating on
which
yourself. Yeah.
yeah, which if you're trying to make decisions based on your data,
Yeah.
it's probably good to have good data.
For sure.
Yeah, so yeah, we just wanted to avoid all of that for
Yeah,
like philosophical reasons, but also just like practical reasons. Like it leads to better results to not shame people for the choices they make.
for sure.
My name is Tony. I'm a strength lifter in my 40s, and I'd just like to say thank you to Phil and his Wits and Weights community for helping me learn more about nutrition and how to implement better ideas into my strength training. Phil has a very, very good understanding of macros and chemical compounds and hormones, um, and all that. And he's continuously learning. And that's what I like about Phil. He's got a great sense of humor. We'll go back and forth. He's very relaxed, very easy to talk to. One of the greatest things about Phil, in my view, is that he practices what he preaches. He also works out with barbells. He trains heavy, not as heavy as me, but he trains heavy. He lifts, so he knows programs. He knows different variations. So if you talk with him about getting in better shape or eating better, he's probably going to give you some good advice. And I would strongly recommend you talk with him, and he'll help you out. Thanks.
All right. So then, the algorithms that are the expenditure algorithm, and then even the weight trend, and it's public knowledge how the weight trend is calculated. But those two features, I think, are huge.
Mhm.
Even the weight trend alone, which is just a simple, equation, I haven't I don't think I've seen it before, MacroFactor consistently done in that way, and it's led to really kind of healthy way to talk about weight when you talk about day-to-day fluctuations versus really what's happening in your body over time, knowing that the fluctuations are going to be pretty variable along the way,
Mhm.
and that's not what drives the fat loss. So maybe talk about the weight side, and then these cool algorithms that help us understand our expenditure.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, the weight trending algorithm is just a 21 or a 20-day exponentially weighted moving average, which does what we want it to.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so if someone were to ask you like, hey, how much do you weigh? The number on the scale today is a indicator with pretty high signal, but not like perfect signal. You know, like if you've been like if you've been around 180 pounds just every day, and then you ate a lot of sodium last night or whatever, so you wake up today and you're 184. Um, the number on the scale is like reflective of how much you weigh. Like 184 isn't like that much different than 180, but it's not a perfect indicator. So yeah, like you probably do want to consider historical information when answering that question because yeah, for that individual, for that example, yeah, they're more 180 than they are 184. Like that, the number today is a bit of an outlier. Um, but at the same time, like trends do still matter. Like if your weight has been going up or whatever, you don't just want to take like a simple average of the last 3 weeks
Mhm.
because the trend is up. And if you just take a simple average, you're weighting older data just as heavily as you're weighting more recent data. And so you'd be like, oh no, like I'm 181, when really like it has been like on the ascent for a while, you know. So yeah, what exponential weighting does is it considers historical context, but it weights more recent data more heavily. And yeah, I think that's just a good logical approach to weight trending. both for answering that question of like, hey, about how much do I weigh today? Like your trended weight, insofar as it differs from the number on the scale, like the trended number is probably closer to reality than just whatever
Mhm.
the number on the scale says today. Um, and then for the purpose of making nutrition adjustments, it does smooth out a lot of that like day-to-day variability, which is pretty clutch. Because I think a mistake people make when they're trying to like adjust their nutrition for themselves is weighing too infrequently. Um, and when you do that, like your perception of your progress can be really, really heavily affected by just day-to-day measurement error. So,
Mhm.
like if someone just weighed once a week, say, and they weigh every Sunday, and that's just their thing. They weigh one week, they weigh the next week. They look at how much the number on the scale has changed between those two measurements, and use that to say like, hey, am I in an energy surplus deficit? Am I roughly at maintenance? And if I am in a surplus or deficit, how large is that surplus or deficit? Like there's going to be a lot of noise there. Like if one week you were kind of coasting along and you were around 181 most days, and then you just happened to be light on Sunday when you weighed in, you're like 179, like 2
Mhm.
pounds variability, like that's a perfectly like normal degree of fluctuation. So yeah, you were around 181 for one week, but then the number on the scale says 179. Then the next week, you're averaging around 180, but then when you step on the scale, you're just a little bit heavier than normal, so it's 181. So in real terms, yeah, you've probably lost about a pound week to week. But if you just compared those single measurements, you'd say, "Oh shit, I gained a pound this week
Mhm.
instead of losing it." Um, so yeah, like you do want to uh, if you're using weight data to like make inferences about your nutrition approach and how large of a surplus or deficit you're in. You do want to weigh more frequently, and you want to like have an analytical approach that does consider all of the data instead of something that can be like pretty heavily influenced by just one or two like aberrant like upwards or downwards
Mhm.
fluctuations.
Yeah, yeah, and I think weighing every day too, if you just do it, it like anything else, you start forgetting about it and you just do it. And you can make it easier with like a smart scale or something like that. That's what I do. What about the other piece of that? Then the algorithm, the expenditure algorithm is kind of a game changer, I think, where the adjustments come from. Also, just being able to see that. I mean, I've gone now through 3 or 4 phases. I posted long, stories about it on Reddit in the past, and just with the graphs because it's so much fun to see that. Hey, in a fat loss phase, you can lose 600 calories on your daily expenditure, even when your activity is the same, or at least you think it's the same, right? Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. So the expenditure algorithm itself is like the math behind it is like very complex and hairy, but the concept is very simple. Which is that a given rate of weight gain or weight loss implies a calorie surplus or deficit of a particular magnitude, because we have a pretty good idea of how much lean mass versus fat mass someone gains when they're in a surplus and lifting weights, and we have a pretty good idea of how much fat mass versus lean mass people lose if they're in an energy deficit. We know the relative energy densities of fat tissue and lean tissue, and therefore, if we observe a certain rate of weight gain or weight loss, we can say, hey, this is about how much fat and lean tissue that corresponds to. And then here are the energy densities of those tissues. And therefore, we can get a pretty good idea of uh, the relative size of your energy deficit or surplus. So that's step one. And you get that without any nutrition tracking whatsoever. If you
Mhm.
just know the weight trending piece of it, you know roughly how large of a surplus or deficit someone's in. And then if you also have nutrition data, you can just put those two pieces of information together. Like, hey, based on my rate of weight loss, I see I'm in a deficit of about 300 calories a day. How much have I been eating over the last week, two, three? About 1,600 calories per day. So eating 1,600, I'm in a 300 calorie deficit. Oh, that must mean I'm burning around 1900 calories a day. So that's the basic concept. And like I said, the actual like mathematics and the implementation gets pretty hairy because like
Mm.
we've got to do some stuff to make sure that like numbers don't just get like uh just like cuckoo and implausible.
Mm.
If
Yeah,
someone like eats way more or less than normal one day, or just like doesn't log a day of eating where they eat way more or less than normal. Like there are safeguards in place to guard against overcorrections that would like necessarily happen if you just sort of like naively accepted the numbers,
mm,
and yeah, didn't do any sort of like post data collection processing to
sure.
make sure that things like correspond with reality. um yeah, I mean that's the basic concept.
Yeah,
um
yeah. No, it's pretty
and
cool.
and like you said, I think that it's very useful, because ultimately, at the end of the day, gaining or losing weight does just come down to like being consistently in an energy deficit or surplus, and successfully gaining or losing weight. So not like losing weight in a way that's gonna just cause like a ton of muscle loss, or just being so hungry and low energy you feel like dog shit all the time and don't follow through, or like gaining weight at a rate that's like restrained and not just like dirty bulking and putting on
Hmm.
3 pounds of muscle and 30 pounds of fat, which I think a lot of people do when they when they
We've
find
all
out.
tried it.
I've certainly
Been there.
done it,
Yep.
and it's
Whole milk. Yeah.
it's very fun, but then at the end of the process, it's like, well, maybe I should have gone about this differently. um,
I hear you.
but uh, but yeah, so you need to be in a surplus or deficit, and you need to have a way to know that not only is it a surplus or deficit, but it's like the magnitude of surplus or deficit that you want and is likely to like produce good results over the long term.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, like you do need some system to at least get a rough idea of how much energy you're burning per day in order to do that. Because like
Hmm.
if you're going to be in a deficit, that's that means eating fewer calories than you're burning. So you need to have a rough idea of how many calories you're burning. And the approach MacroFactor uses is kind of like an individual level, like scientific inquiry almost.
Yeah.
So like science is basically a big fancy system of guess and check,
Hmm.
where you say, hey, I think this thing is going to happen. I'm going to design an experiment to see if this thing happens when a certain intervention is imposed. And then did it happen or not? Oh, if it did, cool, I confirm my hypothesis. Now let's push it further. If not, okay, cool, back to the drawing board, generate a new hypothesis, and just run another process of guess and check. And that is the macro factor approach to determining energy expenditure and therefore calorie targets. So like when you first download the app, it uses a just kind of like standard equation to estimate your BMR,
Hmm.
and tack a activity multiplier on top of it. Really rough estimate of how many calories you're burning. And then it's like, hey, you say you want to lose a pound a week. Cool. Well, we'll take about 500 calories off of what we think your expenditure is, and we think that will be good calorie targets to lose a pound a week. But if you've just downloaded the app and the numbers you get are the numbers you got on startup, there's a pretty decent chance it's not actually going to be that good of a target,
Hmm.
because there's quite a bit of variability in metabolic rates. Activity multipliers are far from an exact science. Um, so yeah, that process like pretty routinely like has the risk of generating errors that are like multiple hundreds of calories per day. So it might say, hey, 2500 calories a day, like we think you're burning 3000 calories a day, so to lose a pound a week, 2500 is the target to shoot for.
Yep.
um and you start eating 2,500 calories per day, and maybe you're not losing any weight at all. That then suggests, like, again, kind of the guess and check process. The app guesses, 2,500 is the number to lose a pound a week. You eat that. That's sort of like you generated the hypothesis. Now let's collect some data. Okay, now let's observe the results. Oh, you didn't lose any weight at all. Okay, well, that means that we probably overestimated your expenditure. So your calorie targets were too high. So, your estimated expenditure is going to
Yeah.
trend down. Your calorie targets are going to trend down. Based on your data suggests that in order to meet your goals and lose weight at the rate you want to, you probably need to be eating a little bit less. Or the opposite, like the app thinks you're burning 3,000 calories a day on setup. You start eating 2,500 and you start losing 2 pounds a week. Again, like it's not just like a binary guess and check.
Yep.
It's like it's a graded thing. So it's like, hey, we thought you were burning 3,000 calories, so we thought 2,500 would let you lose a pound a week. We're observing that when you eat 2,500, you lose 2 pounds a week. So that necessarily means you're burning more than 3,000 calories per day. So that means to lose a pound a week, your calorie targets need to trend up.
Right.
So yeah, like it's that process, which as someone who's a proud empiricist and loves science, that just appeals to me, kind of on an intuitive level. But it's also, I think, and like I'm not just saying this because I have skin in the game. Like it's again sort of like a chicken and egg scenario. Like um, I'm not singing the praises of MacroFactor system because it's something I make money from. It's more like I identified issues with other systems, which is why we have the system in MacroFactor. So yeah, like the alternate approaches to determining uh, like how much energy you're burning and therefore what
Mhm.
appropriate calorie targets would be, um, don't have that scientific process, that kind of like guess and check mechanism built in. And that would be fine if there was a system that could like reliably produce very accurate and precise estimates of energy expenditure, but
Yeah.
like there isn't. And
Just like
I
just like body fat. Yeah, we don't
well,
have it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Yeah.
So like I'm working on an article about the relative accuracy of BMR equations now.
Okay.
Which like if someone's ever been to a website with like a TDE calculator or BMR
Yeah.
calculator, those are based on kind of like standard validated equations where
Mifflin St. Jeor and some of the others. Yeah.
yeah, Harris
Yeah.
Benedict,
Benedict, yep.
Cunningham, like there are a bunch. Owen, Livingston, the FAO has one. Like there are probably like 40 different formulas floating around out there. But yeah, so you put in your relevant demographic and anthropometric information. Depending on the formula, it might look for like age, sex, height, weight, um, maybe activity levels, or there are other ones that are just scaled to like lean mass or fat free mass. But whatever, like whichever approach they take, it takes sort of like readily and fairly easily accessible information about you, and essentially just uses multiple regression to predict your BMR from that. And that's really only a good approach for getting kind of like a rough ballpark estimate. But so like to get like a little bit nerdy about this. So if you're validating a BMR equation, what you're going to do is you're going to collect all of the data that would feed into the equation. You're also just going to measure people's BMRs, generally via indirect calorimetry. And then once you've either like created a new formula or you've selected which formula you're going to use to kind of like see how close it gets to the measured values, you feed all of the subject's data into that formula and you get a list of predicted BMR values. And then for those subjects, you also have a list of their actual BMR values that you measured. And then you construct what is called a Bland-Altman plot to see how well those two values add up.
Mhm.
The Bland-Altman plot tells you what the like average amount of disagreement between the measurement and your estimate is, and then it also tells you what's called your limits of agreement, which is basically the range in which 95% of your prediction errors should fall.
Mhm.
Um, and like what you typically see is like the width of those limits of agreement for BMR formulas are like 800 calories. Usually the average prediction error is pretty small, and I think people look at that a little bit too hard, where it's like, ooh, yeah. So Mifflin St. Jeor, according to this study, overestimates BMR by 20 calories or whatever. So if I use Mifflin St. Jeor
Mm.
and it says my BMR is 1500 calories, that means it's actually 1480. But no, the average error is not what you want to pay the most attention to. You want to pay the most attention to the limits of
The
agreement,
limits.
because that
Yeah.
tells you the plausible range of errors that people experience. And again, not talking about outliers. We're talking about where 95% of the data
Mm.
points will fall. And so just based on like some pretty straightforward probability, if you have 14 people in a room, you have a better than 50% chance that one of them will have a BMR that would fall outside of those limits of agreement.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so limits of agreement are typically like 800 calories, like around that. So if a BMR equation says, yeah, your basal metabolic rate is 1500 calories per day, just probabilistically, it's much more likely to be close to 1500 than close to, I don't know, 1200 or whatever. But there's a pretty decent shot that it could be anywhere within that 800 calorie range. So if it says 1500, um, there's like a roughly two-thirds chance that you'll be within one standard deviation of the mean. So
Sure.
if the limits of agreement span a range of 800 calories, that means 2 times standard deviation is like 400 calories. So that means the standard deviation is around 200. Um, oh God, I don't know why I talk about
It's
math on.
okay. No, this is no. So
It
in
feels so much.
summary, the BMR is already off by hundreds of calories, and then
Yeah,
the TDEE could be worse if you don't even know the right activity level to
yeah, so,
choose.
so like here's the basic
Yeah.
takeaway. Um,
Yeah.
if you put your numbers into like a BMR formula, just give it like plus or minus 400 calories. Like that's what the 800 calorie limits of agreement imply. So if a BMR formula says, hey, your BMR is 600 calories per day, that means that there's a 95% chance that it's somewhere between 1200 and 2000,
Yep.
which is a pretty fucking big range.
Yeah.
Um, and then, like I said, activity multipliers, far from an exact science. And even if you pick the right activity multiplier, like even if you say, hey, I am moderately active, and my definition of moderately active corresponds with whatever this set of multipliers conception of moderately active is, like perfect one-to-one correspondence. Um, and the multiplier there is 1.55. Even if that is the perfect multiplier, even if you are burning 55% more calories than BMR, if there was error in the initial BMR step,
Hmm.
the multiplier just propagates the error.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so functionally, if like the limits of agreement would span a range of like 800 calories just for the BMR step, once you put like a 1.5 times multiplier on it, now the limits of agreement
Mm.
will functionally span a range of like 1200 calories.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
in that same example, like if yeah, like if a TDE calculator says, hey, we think you're burning 3000 calories per day, that means you're probably burning somewhere between 2400 and like
Yeah.
3600.
Yeah.
But again, that's a fucking huge range.
It's huge.
And so like, you're going to need some sort of system. Like it doesn't have to be MacroFactor system, but you're going to need some sort of system to like guess and check and
Right.
validate. Is this a good guess? Is it not? Does it need to go up or down? So like that's one approach
Right.
people use. The other approach people use is like using wearable devices to like monitor activity levels and estimate total daily energy expenditure. But that's like basically the same process. So they will estimate your basal metabolic rate via the same sorts of equations that anyone would use to estimate BMR. Um, and then from there, like they estimate how many additional calories you're burning via exercise, but there's not there's not like an inbuilt system in those devices to validate whether the initial BMR guess was good or bad,
Right.
because it's not taking in like contextual information to like validate whether that estimate was good or bad.
Hmm.
And then just like the estimate of like energy expenditure itself, like during activity, is also extremely rough.
Yep.
And I don't think a lot of people realize this, but like there was a systematic review by Fuller and colleagues from like 2020 that was looking at like what the typical error for wearable devices for measuring energy expenditure was, comparing the estimate from wearable devices to like the gold standard measure for estimating energy expenditure in free living humans, which is doubly labeled water. And the errors produced by wearable devices exceeded 10% more than 80% of the time. And like 10% is pretty big. Like
Yeah.
typical guy burns somewhere around 3,000 calories per day. That means that, if you burn 3,000 calories per day, there's like an 80% chance that your wearable will say you either burn fewer than 2,700 or more than
Hmm.
3,300. But like 10% plus or minus what your TDE is still like a pretty big range. And it's not like that. And again, that's not like the maximum error you can get. It's like 80% of the time the error will be larger than
Yeah.
that. And so yeah, like there's not a good way just out of the box to say, hey, without any sort of like scientific process on the individual level, without any sort of guess and check process, there is not a system in existence that can reliably produce accurate estimates of how much energy you're burning. Like there needs to be some sort of process that takes into account how much you're eating and how much you're eating affects how your weight is
Yeah.
changing
Right.
in order to estimate it. Like that,
Yeah.
if there is a better way to do it, I'm not aware of it. And so yeah, like we like I'm not like denigrating the other methods of estimating energy expenditure because I'm a co-owner of MacroFactor. Like I'm a co-owner of MacroFactor because the other methods didn't work.
Yeah, that
uh,
was your purpose, and the purpose led
yeah, like
to
we
everybody wants MacroFactor because it works. It's
yeah,
okay.
like
I'll promote it for you.
yeah, like we just wanted to put the better
Yeah.
approach like onto the market, which
Yeah.
I mean, like you can also like do most of that stuff yourself. Like you could track your calories in a free app. You can track your weight. And if you're like fairly mathematically or statistically inclined, like it's not that hard to put together like a set of formulas that will like roughly approximate what macro factor does. I mean, like that's what I did. The
Right, you started
what
with a spreadsheet. Yeah.
Yes, it started with a spreadsheet that I made in undergrad when I'd taken
Yeah.
like one nutrition class. Like
Still,
it's
it goes back to friction though, right, Greg? Like,
yeah,
most people aren't
yeah,
gonna do that. Most people aren't
yeah.
gonna do even I
So
love spreadsheets, but I don't have the time for that, so I'm
yeah,
not gonna do it, you know?
yeah. So like you don't have to buy
Yeah.
MacroFactor to use this
Right.
general approach. And whether or not you buy MacroFactor, I would strongly recommend using this general approach. But then
Mhm,
like you
mhm.
said, having it in like a slick app interface where the food logging is very efficient, everything is good. And it's also doing this thing that would otherwise take additional manual effort for you to do
Yep.
yourself. It just like reduces the friction and I don't
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like it's good. Like
It's good. No, it's good. And for
yeah.
people listening, going back to the BMR thing or the TDE calculation, the traditional approach, right, is to try to maintain your calorie intake for like 2 weeks and then measure your weight and kind of get it that way. With MacroFactor, you can it's super tolerable to however much you eat. It doesn't really matter. It's collecting the data either way, which I really like about it because I get kind of confusion from people on that. Like, well, I missed my target, so how's it going to know it? Well, it knows because you've got the data, regardless of
Yeah.
whether you're over or under. There are some interesting corner cases, I guess. One is I've noticed with clients is body recomp when they're new lifters and they're really putting on muscle mass pretty quickly, and their weight kind of gets offset
Mhm.
artificially from MacroFactor's perspective because it doesn't know your body composition. That would be ideal if we could just plug into an accurate body fat measurement, which doesn't exist. Because what will happen is the weight will say if they're at maintenance, their weight might start to tick up because of the muscle mass, and the MacroFactor thinks your expenditure is lower and then wants to cut the calories. So we had to have that conversation of like, well, maybe let's just keep the calories a little higher for a little bit, knowing that this is happening. All right, I know we're running long on time. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up, or a question you wish I had asked, Greg?
If you have more, we can keep going. Like I fully understand that when I'm on podcasts, they tend to run long because I don't shut the fuck up. So if there's more you wanted to cover, like I'm chill. Like I know you carved out an hour in my schedule. I did not go into this with the expectation that it would only be an hour. Like
Yeah.
I know what it's like when I start talking. But like if you need to wrap up, that's
No,
also
no, I was being respectful of you because I've had guests that are like, it's on the hour. We gotta wrap
yeah,
up.
no. If you have some more questions, we can keep going.
I just wanted to get a little bit more into like the science side of things because that's a lot of what you do, right? With Stronger by Science, with your
Mhm.
podcast, the research spotlights, which I really like because they're super digestible. You had the one recently about the bedtime protein, and then one not so long ago about training while you're pregnant and things like that. Um, what what areas of lifting or nutrition science are you most into right now? Like, I'm curious how you pick the studies that you even care about and write about. But like, what are you interested in? Is there anything surprising coming out? Anything really gets you going right now?
Um, hmm. I don't have a great answer to that question, honestly.
Too broad.
I don't know. It is just like kind of on a case by case basis. Like so back when I wrote for Mass, like we had a journal sweep that we did every month. Uh, just like pulling out from like close to 150 journals, just all of the studies that just based on the title, we thought, this might be interesting. And then we'd go through the abstracts to kind of like filter further, and then from there just like pull up full text, just kind of skim them, like, hey, does it look like this study was done pretty well, or is maybe the abstract like overselling it a little bit. And then from there just kind of like narrow down what we wanted to write about. Um so like we still like I still have access to that journal sweep. So it's still like basically the same process. Like I just go through what was published, and if something just kind of like tickles my brain the right way, I'm like, oh,
Okay.
that's
All right.
that's interesting.
Could you use AI for this now? I mean, it seems like a good use of AI to sift through that.
Uh, I think that's probably possible. I don't know. I mean, like, so we pay people to do the journal sweep now, and like until we have like robust UBI or just like I don't know some sort of like more collectivist economic system. I don't necessarily want to be on the vanguard of replacing human jobs with
Got
AI.
it. Got it. No, that's just asking. It comes up so often these days with all sorts of
so,
topics. I'm
so
curious.
yeah, that's one consideration. And then another is like I just like that process.
Mhm.
Like at least like once the list is put together, just like manually sifting through it. I like it. I think it's meditative.
Yeah.
And it also, even for the papers I don't actually like sit down and read, I at least see a list of like what is getting published and like what is getting research attention.
Right.
So like there might be a topic where um for like a year straight, like every month or two, a new study will pop up on this particular topic. And I'm just not that interested in it. But then once I see it enough, I'm just like, damn, why do people keep publishing about this? This just doesn't seem like it should be
Yeah,
that interesting. But like
right.
people keep publishing, so like maybe there's something here. Um, and so yeah, like I wouldn't get that if I had like an AI program kind of like sift through the list for me
Sure,
and just give
sure.
me like the curated list. Like I think that there's I think that there's often a lot of value in efficiency. I think that like as a business owner, I see a lot of people who are in a similar position that are like very obsessed with increasing efficiency at all costs. Like, hey, anything that's like not necessary or kind of like a or like a low leverage thing, can I get someone else to do it for me? Can I just stop doing it? What like that type of deal.
Mhm.
I don't know. I think a lot of the good things that have happened to me, at least in business, have been due to doing a bunch of stuff that on the surface looks like it should be inefficient. So yeah, like I spend probably like 2 or 3 hours per month just sifting through the journal list that I'm positive I could automate, or either that or just like hire someone to do it for me. Just be like, hey, look back at the stuff I've written before, use that to kind of like calibrate what you think my general preferences and studies are. And then, hey, here's a list. Just pull out the 15 studies you think that I'll like. Like, I could do that. But then I would miss,
You'd be disconnected.
yeah,
Maybe.
I would miss
Yeah,
a bunch of stuff that's
yeah.
getting published that I may have found interesting that my prior writings wouldn't have suggested that I would have found interesting.
Mm,
And just like miss trends as they develop and whatnot. And another good example of that is just like I do a ton of community engagement, like with MacroFactor. Like I'm in the groups all the time. Like you said, like before we knew each other, like you DM'd me and I responded, and like I don't really respond to Instagram DMs anymore. Just because I hate Instagram. I don't like the platform. Actually, what it is I don't like typing on my phone. Uh,
yeah.
but if someone emails me or they send me like a Facebook message where I can respond on Messenger, like I respond 100% of the time.
Mhm.
And that is like I do. I probably should do less of that, but even if I didn't respond to everyone, I would still want to respond to a lot and like be in the groups a lot because I think that that's another thing that's kind of like on its face inefficient, but a dynamic that I pretty frequently see with people who have content businesses and get pretty successful, and it goes from being more of like a I am in this community and maybe like kind of like the leader of the community, but kind of like a first among equals type of deal. Like I'm still in it amongst the people and seeing what their concerns are and what they're
Mhm.
talking about. Then you get some success and you're like, oh well, that's a lot of work. I'm going to hire someone to be my community manager. I'm not going to go in there at all. I'm not going to read the comments
Mm.
and
Seen that.
and I built this success off of like my single brilliant vision that people have flocked to. Like so oftentimes that's a lie. Like oftentimes people do get popular because they're like pretty plugged into their
Yeah,
communities
it's
and they
them.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they understand what people care about and what they want. And then as they get more successful, they view it as a benefit that now they can put some distance between themselves and the
sure.
people. But they just end up like getting disconnected from kind of like the source of what made them like relatable and able to make content that like
Mm,
people in their community actually wanted to consume because like they kind of like sever their connection to that. So yeah, like with MacroFactor for instance, like we're like a very heavily community driven app.
yep.
Like all of us are like reading the Facebook group, reading the subreddit. We see what people are talking about. We see what concerns they have. We have a public roadmap. There's a feature submission portal there. Like we monitor all of that. Like we know what people want. We know what problems people have with the current product, and we know what new features people want to see. And like, here's a crazy concept. Like, most people aren't idiots. Like, most people know what they want. Most people will tell you what they want if you ask them, or if you create a space where they feel
Yeah.
comfortable like expressing what they want. And then if you give it to them, they tend to be very happy about that.
Happy and loyal. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
they're like,
sure.
"Oh my god, this is a great product." It turns out, like, if you build the thing that I said I wanted, it turns out to be the thing I wanted, and I like it. Uh, and so,
It's
like,
true. I tell people all the time, I'm like in the MacroFactor community, and these other apps are just these cold third-party apps with some unnamed person behind them. There's a big difference.
yeah,
So
and and
I'm glad you do that. Yeah.
and so, like, in a vacuum, each step of that process seems like it should be really inefficient. Like, just purely from like a business operations perspective, if we close down the roadmap and close down the groups, or just like never win in the groups ever again for probably like 3 months, it would just be like a net benefit to the business, because like we would have more time to do other stuff. Like, we're trimming off a day-to-day thing that, like, in a vacuum seems bad, seems like it should be inefficient, and seems like there should be higher leverage stuff to do elsewhere. um but then, like, after that 3-month mark, I think like the cracks would start to show, and I
Mhm.
think that the product that we would end up building wouldn't be as aligned with what users actually wanted, and therefore would just wind up being a worse product, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I think that, I don't know. Like, I know this started with you asking about, like, could
I
we
no,
use
I like where it
AI
went. I like where it
first?
went as a business owner and people
But
listening, and also if they want to use MacroFactor, knowing that there's this community
yeah,
behind it, and it's not just an app community. It's like a ton of people trying to do the same thing using the app and get results. So you learn a lot about fat loss and protein and the evidence and everything just by talking to people in the group. Yeah.
but but yeah, like, just kind of my broad point is, I think that a lot of people get overly focused on efficiency and like
Mm,
metrics and quantification.
sure.
And I think that there are a lot of things that, like, if you look at them in a vacuum and only focus on the things you can quantify, you would say this is bad. It's a poor use of time. I shouldn't do it. I should do things that, like, quantifiably, at least in the short term, would give like a higher ROI. But then, like, there are just a lot of like kind of like second order effects that are uh, challenging to quantify, or impossible to quantify. Um, and that oftentimes, like, that sort of pursuit and orientation gives you like short-term gains, but kind of like stymies you in the long term. Here's another great
Mm,
example of this. So, like, online marketing shit just drives me crazy. And the thing is, people with like really like spammy like approaches to online marketing, and like email marketing in particular, um I think it's like the ultimate expression of how, like, an overemphasis on like efficiency and quantification can make you look like you're making the right choice the whole time, and end up like fucking you very badly.
mm,
Because, like, the thing is, like, really, so if you have like an inbox full of like, your email's gotten on a bunch of email lists, just every time you open one, it's just like, just hard sell tactics. Like, it's really kind of like spammy, kind of scammy, very in your face, trying to like push your emotional buttons and like find the pain points in order to close the sale. um People who go down that road, I understand why they do, because for a single email, those emails work much better than anything else. Like, there's a fucking reason people do it, and it's because, like,
mhm,
if you're trying to make as much money as possible from one email you send your list, that is the type of email you want to send, because, like, it's going to have some sort of like clickbait subject line to get people to click in and read it. And then most people aren't going to buy from any sales email you send. But if you kind of like have you get your like emotional hooks in someone early on, and then operate some sunk cost fallacy, make it really fucking long, tell a long story. So like by the end, it's just like, oh well, God, I feel like I have to fucking buy something, or I just wasted 15 minutes of my life reading all of this. You put some like false urgency on it to where
Mhm.
they feel like, well, I have to buy now to get it to like get the deal. Just all of like the hard sell tactics you see in email
Sure.
marketing. For a single email, that's exactly what you wanna do. Like, that will make you more money than any other single email you can send. Like, if a well a well put together, hard sell, long form sales letter, like, there's a reason
Mhm.
people do
Mhm.
it. It works. But the thing is, like, you can quantify those first order effects. You can quantify, opens, you can quantify click-throughs, you can quantify sales. You can't quantify, reputational damage. So and so if you do that once, you make more money. And maybe if you don't do it again, people forget about it. But if you see how well it worked and you say, "Hey, based on the metrics, I can quantify this shit. This is what I need to do now." The person I just paid for like an online marketing course, they were spot on. Like I took their advice, sent this email, man, it rocked. Then you start doing that, and yeah, you just like alienate your whole audience, you know? And I've seen so many people go down that road, and as they do it, I am 100% sure all of their metrics, all of the things they can quantify are telling them you are doing the
To
right
do that,
thing,
yeah, right.
but they
Mhm.
are doing the exact wrong thing.
In the long term.
Um, and yeah, so that's just kind of a lens that I like to look through everything through. So like I do think that I could probably use my time a little bit better and more efficiently. That like there is probably some fat that I could skim that wouldn't have like deleterious long term like second order negative effects. Um, but I'm always careful about that because I
Sure.
do think that that is an incredibly easy and alluring trap to fall into
Okay.
in all aspects of life. Like there's a lot of value in stopping to smell the roses, and
Mhm.
not
Yeah,
not
no, that
not
yeah.
always taking the fastest way between 2 points. Because oftentimes, like, the stops along the way are where you learn, like, interesting shit that, like, doesn't serve any value for you now, but, like, you tuck it away
Yep.
in the back of your mind and, like, "Ooh, pull that out at some point in the future," and it unlocks something that you would have been unable to unlock
Yes.
if you would have just taken the most efficient path between A and B every time.
That's where I think you were going with that too, the idea of just getting your hands in all sorts of things, being there, being connected, and you never know what's gonna happen. You never know who you're gonna meet. I mean, I've seen there's so many things I do where I don't make any money from them, like podcasting, but man, I got to meet you and so many other great people, and who knows what these, you know, educational opportunities and relationships will lead to. And this is a good way, I think, to conclude here because we came full circle when we talked about balance and like how you work so hard, but also you want to stay connected on things and not necessarily pull away from everything. So, any last words, or how about tell people where they can learn about you?
Sure. So, let's see. I don't have last words. I don't think.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So, if you want to check out MacroFactor, check it out. What's your affiliate code? If you're listening to this, put in Philip's
Wits and
affiliate.
weights. Wits and weights.
Yeah, so go with Wits and Weights. That'll extend your free trial from 1 week to 2. And yeah, you can get that on the App Store and Play Store. If you're listening to this podcast, you like audio content. If you want to listen to another podcast, check out the Stronger by Science podcast. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found. Um, if you like written content, there's a bunch of good free content on strongerbyscience.com and macrofactorapp.com. Macrofactorapp.com, not just a sales page for a product. Like
Mhm.
there is a lot of good in-depth content there. Um, and yeah, social media, probably the best thing to follow would be the Stronger by Science Instagram account. You can follow my personal Instagram account. It's just at Greg Nuckols. I don't post there anymore, like ever. And that is the one place where I don't really respond to DMs. So yeah, don't follow my personal account. Follow the Stronger by Science account if you want to see what we're up to on social media.
And that's why I Facebook messaged Greg before this call as a reminder, because I knew not to do that. Okay, great. Well, I'll throw all those links in the show notes, man. It was pretty epic. I appreciated you sticking around this amount of time and talking about a whole bunch of things I didn't think we'd get into, which I love. So thank you so
Oh,
much.
thanks for having me on. It was a blast.